Hello everybody, I am Christian Watson and welcome to my video. In this video, we're talking about the topic, the fascinating delusion of queers for Palestine. Now, before I talk about this topic, because a lot of people have a tendency to make assumptions about the topic before I talk about it or to give their own thoughts before hearing the video, allow me to make a few things exponentially clear. Number one, I don't really care what side of the Israel-Palestine conflict you are on. That doesn't matter to me. For the purposes of this video, that is immaterial. What I care about is people being philosophically, intellectually, and morally consistent in their positions, and secondly, not holding mutually contradictory opinions in the course of their worldview. That's what I care about. And that's one of the reasons why I'm addressing this, not for some partisan urge of promoting one side of the conflict or degrading another side with the silver tongue. Secondly, another thing that has to be clear. Many of you may be expecting me to criticize people who support Queers for Palestine by mentioning the fact that the Palestinian population at large views honor killing as more acceptable than homosexuality, or by mentioning the fact that homosexuality is indeed punished by death in the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. But guess what? I think while those are very valid points, and while those points need to continue to be made, a lot of people are making them, and they are really surface-level critiques that refuse to scratch the surface of the phenomenon of Queers for Palestine. Because on the surface of it, it does seem ridiculous if you solely consider those two facts I just laid out to you. But I think there is something deeper happening here with the Queers for Palestine phenomenon, which Queers for Palestine is merely a microcosm of the broader trend which we can see manifest in different areas of left-wing thought. And that's actually one of the reasons why I think this phenomenon is fascinating, because Queers for Palestine represents the core of the left-wing worldview concerning world events that I believe that so many people are getting sucked up into. Now, think about this for a second. The reason why I find Queers for Palestine so fascinating is because I believe ultimately it is a reflection of a projection of left-wing minds' analysis towards the events in the Middle East. What do I mean? Okay, I'll put it this way. Let's do a little bit of a story here. Let's assume that, for sake, let's take any opinion on anything like war. Let's assume there is a war raging somewhere in southern China. Now, if you were like me, an American, you are thousands upon thousands of miles away from southern China. And you may only hear about that war by way of the media or by way of video. You may see video snippets of it, although, of course, in this age of propaganda and deepfakes and AI and the supremacy of the digital mind over the literary mind, we don't really know what's true. And not only do we not know what's true when it comes to war, a lot of us don't have the patience to sift through the nonsense and the propaganda to get to the truth because, as I mentioned, the digital mind has deteriorated our ability to focus for more than 60 seconds. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's say there's a war in southern China and you see images of it, you see pictures of it. Now let's say, you form an opinion of this war on the basis of what you see from thousands of miles away. Now let's also assume a different scenario. You are someone who's actually affected by the war in southern China. Not only are you affected by it, your house just got hit by a bomb from one of the opposing factions. Not only that, but you've lost family members to it. Not only that, but you are actively fighting for your life in exile, trying to flee from artillery shells bearing down upon you. I can get creative when it comes to this stuff, but please, bear with me. Now, common sense would tell us that these two different people, the American thousands of miles away from the situation, removed from it, and the person in southern China will have two different perspectives because they relate to the situation differently. This is natural. That's why when there's an earthquake somewhere in Tibet or in Nepal, many of us will simply say, oh, that's so bad, and go on with our day. Because it doesn't actually affect our everyday lives. You can still go to the grocery store, you can still get in your car, get in the bus, or get in your Uber, and you can still go see family, you can still do whatever you need to do because that situation had no impact on you. So relating to events is the key to forming a perspective of those events. And the different levels of human relations to events will decide what perspective you form on those events. Now, that's one level of analysis. Let's now assume that this American, who has the same information as the American in our previous example had, has a worldview. And this worldview sees everything in terms of power. It reduces everything to power. It doesn't see human beings as individuals that have unique characteristics and spiritual value with the ability to reason and think. It sees human beings as clay products, like clay molding products of systems of power that have existed before many of us were even born and that continue to shape the world that we are in. Now, this American may look at those events from this, disjointed perspective. They may see, instead of seeing two warring factions, they may see an oppressor and they may see an oppressed. And this is how they will form their worldview. Now, many of you may have already said, well, Christian, I knew this already. Good, I'm happy you did. Most folks don't really think on these lines. But let's go further for those of you who knew this already. Let's go further. Now, let's say, in the third example, that this American, on top of holding a modern-day, woke left-wing worldview, also holds an epistemically unsound idea about knowledge and experience. Epistemology is simply, in philosophy, the study of knowledge. So when I say epistemic, I'm talking about things relating to that study. And so epistemology is how we think about knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we figure out what is true? All that kind of stuff. The Matrix, for example, the popular show, is actually a brilliant study in epistemology because Neo, the main character, is the person who has access to objective truth, whereas everyone else in the Matrix that is outside of his ship, outside of his crew, are all taken in by the illusion. And because the illusion feels so good, they don't want to go away from it. But Neo, because he understands the illusion is false and stunts his human flourishing, he actually pushes against it. And he gets superpowers. He gets powers from it because by learning the truth, he has the ability to overcome falsehood. The Matrix is basically just this one big philosophical essay that incorporates so many different strands and themes from philosophy into this really cool series. Most of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it entirely. So let's say that this person has this epistemically unsound worldview, where they pride experience in subjective opinions over empirically observable fact or logically deduced truths. Let's say that this person believes that the people in the group being attacked have some unique place on the hierarchy of struggle and victimhood. And let's say that that unique place on the hierarchy of struggle and victimhood to this American gives the people who are oppressed a special insight into particular kinds of things that no one else has the right or the ability by virtue of their identity to understand. This may seem abstract, but it's really not. When someone says to you, when you're debating, let's say, take an issue like abortion. When someone says, oh, I don't believe that men should comment about abortion because men don't have a woman's body. What they are essentially saying is that moral intuition on a topic like abortion is restricted to women because they are the ones that deal with it. Now, what's the obvious problem with this? Number one, if you believe morality is universal and is objective, then anyone, man or woman, has the right to form moral conclusions on the basis of solid foundations. The problem is, in this viewpoint, the third example I've given you, this American who sees everything in terms of power and who additionally sees everything in terms of oppression and also now sees everything in terms of subjective opinion has no concept of objective reality because they have learned to distill anything that seems like it comes outside of their perspective and make it conform to their worldview. This is what the Queers for Palestine phenomenon is. It's not merely an affirmation of social justice. It's not merely oppressor versus oppressed. It's not merely an opinion based in ignorance. It's all those things, but not merely. It is fundamentally a perspective about the human being and how we as human beings can understand the world around us. It's a perspective mired in almost near nihilism, which puts all the emphasis onto perspective and none of the emphasis onto finding the actual truth. That is why contradictory positions like that are acceptable, because you're not looking outside of yourself. You are reducing the entirety of a particular event to yourself and your mind and your perspective. So the Third American in our example is basically the placeholder for the Queer for Palestine folks in almost every other topic. This is what's happening. This is why these things occur. This is why these things are vile, because they are an affront to our ability to reckon with the world as it is. And if we refuse as human beings to reckon with the world as it is, the world will march right along without us. We'll be left in the dust, and we will be forced to suffer the consequences of our ignorance, because ignorance for a very long time does not remain bliss forever. But there's a deeper point. For those of you who are still with me after all of this, thank you for staying. There's a deeper point I want to take you guys now to, that I think kind of ties this all together. The left-wing perspective about truth, the self, and oppression is actually derivative of the old world philosophies that dominated human civilization for thousands of years, and only in the past 270 plus years has been challenged by the advent of the beacon of truth, light, and individualism that is America. And that is this. In the old world system, the society of status was the primary way for individuals to reckon with their place in the world and also to reckon with the world itself. Society of status is very clear. If you were born into a certain class, if you were born to a certain group, if your parents were a certain class, if your parents did a certain thing in their past lives, whatever, you would be cast in those terms. You would not be seen as someone capable of independent thought. That was grounds for being killed as a heretic, or that was grounds for being exiled from the village, which back then meant certain death, because you go out to the woods, there's no fire, there's no light. Human civilization was birthed from the cradle of fire. You go out to where there's no fire, you die. You either die because of the cold, because of the animals, whatever, you die. That's what it was back then if you didn't want to conform, if you didn't want to actually follow your conscience. Conscience wasn't really a developed notion in the old world, except in the sense where it considered the idea of the common good. And the idea of the common good was actually part and parcel to the old world. What am I saying? Why am I taking us down this historical lesson? Because I'm trying to get you guys to understand. Queers for Palestine is not a 21st century phenomenon. Queers for Palestine is a phenomenon that has been occurring for thousands of years in terms of the principle that birthed it. And the principle that birthed it is one that focuses on status and one that ignores anything outside of that narrow worldview. It's one that focuses on position and a position in the abstract, as opposed to looking at the individual human beings that are being considered in the first place. That is what's actually going on here. And that's why it's so fascinating that people can divorce themselves intentionally through intellectual engineering from common sense, so much so that their entire view of the world is one rooted in the abstract. And then, in addition to that, rooted in several erroneous assumptions about that abstract, which allows them to have mutually exclusive, contradictory opinions. Those of you who focus on Palestinians killing gays, those of you who focus on the mentalities in the Arab world towards gays are missing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is simple. The old world and the left are still united. And the old world and certain segments of the right are also united. But one thing is true, regardless of this temporal situating of worldviews. The old world is the biggest threat to human progress, to human freedom, to critical thinking, and to civilization that currently exists right now. It's because everything beneath the old world has proven to be destructive. Radical Islam is an example of the old world. Multiculturalism is an example of the old world dressed up in new world clothing, but it's an example, old world terms applied to old world ideas that are being applied to new world terms like equity or whatever. It's all old world. And keep going on and on. Socialism is a product of the society of status. I keep going on and on and on. Because at the core of all these ideas is a rejection of the human person's ability to make sense of the world for how it is, as opposed to how it's been cast towards him by people in society, by institutions, and by haughty philosophers that are disconnected from the solid ground of truth. The old world will be the undoing of the Enlightenment era product that is America, and that is modern human civilization. It's the old world that convinced women that men were their eternal enemy because they had allegedly ruled in patriarchies for thousands of years throughout history. That's the old world that breaks things down into a conflict-based idea, which is not unlike what Thomas Hobbes, that foolish philosopher, tried to push in his book, The Leviathan, where he said that human beings naturally are just terrible and they fight, so they need to have authority to hold them down and make them good. That's basically, second wave feminism is a derivative of that idea. It takes that idea and says, okay, we need to use this authority to fight against men and to liberate ourselves from not a particular object of oppression, but from all restraints. That's why you see sexual liberation. It's why you see all these women doing OnlyFans. It's all downstream of the old world thinking. I keep going on and on. Point is this. Don't ignore the effects of the old world on, forget civilization, on the critical thinking of the individual person. If you want to actually understand the core root of these issues. I myself think that those who are saying gays for Palestine or queers for Palestine or whatever, they need to understand they are not in control of their own minds. Their minds are possessed by ancient ideas that will do nothing more than use them as vassals to be harbingers for a reality that is fundamentally anti-human and also fundamentally opposed to the truth. And that's not a reality that I intend to allow to come to fruition. And I most certainly hope that's not a reality that you intend to allow to come into fruition. Speak up, my friends. Study history. Study philosophy. If you want to help me keep my message, get my message out there, donate to me. Patreon, PayPal, Locals, ChristianLocals.com. Please be sure to join my Discord. Be sure to comment, do whatever you can. Share this video, like this video. Help me get out there. I love you guys so much, and please, 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 you better stay pensive. Bye, everyone.